Aletha.
I just have a couple of technical questions because we've been talking about this quite a lot and I finally understand it. Thank you. I'm finally catching on. But I heard you mention membrane filtration. I heard you mention sand and gravel, that kind of thing. So I understand that there are different options for filtration. First, I suppose one is superior to the other, first of all, just yes or no?
It really depends on the water quality and the individual circumstances of the water system. It really varies from water system to system.
I mean, is one the ultimate answer or
Well, you know, membrane filtration is the latest and greatest technology,
okay.
and it's probably, if I had to pick one, yeah, that would be it.
Okay, so I understand that it gets rid of the crypto, and does it also filter out the things for which we are now using chlorine? Would that go away as a requirement if you have filtration?
No, well, no, the chlorine, every surface water system has to maintain a chlorine residual or another disinfectant residual. So no, the chlorine would still be required. Yeah.
Your chlorination would be drastically reduced, however, because at this time you have to chlorinate to 3 log inactivation of Giardia, and there's a whole complicated. It's based on what's called CT, which is the product of the chlorine concentration and the time. So that's why years ago you added baffling in your reservoir to create that time, and so that the chlorine goes through there. For example, Prairie City down in Grant County just put in slow sand filtration, and they were essentially meeting the unfiltered requirements, at least as far as disinfection. But once they put in their filtration system, their use of chlorine dropped incredibly. It dropped way down. So you're actually, essentially you would be using less chlorine if you had filtration, because chlorination then becomes simply the backup, and it's not the primary treatment anymore.
So, and then I heard you say the only safe thing is to boil the water instead of using a Brit filter here. So is a Brit filter, say, significantly less effective than membrane filtration? Or are there organisms that can also penetrate membranes that just have not been identified yet as requirements for us to deal with? In other words,
well,
what's after the
I'll take that. In the realm of waterborne disease organisms, the ones you worry about are viruses. That's the new groundwater rule was to address viruses. And the thing with viruses nowadays, even, that comes from human sewage, the kinds of viruses that can affect people. With bacteria and the parasites, like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, those can come from animals. So unless you had sewage outfalls in your watershed, you wouldn't be concerned about human viruses per se. So if you had an issue where the city was on a boil water, there are lots of individual filtration methods. I don't know necessarily whether Brita would meet that criteria, but there are types of in-home treatment units that people could install that are, filter the water or treat the water in such a way that it would make it safe from any kinds of organisms, including viruses or whatever. So there are various types of in-home filtration methods that people can use.
And the last thing which just came to mind, since you mentioned viruses not being out in the watershed, there was just an article in the Oregonian over the weekend about the Hanta virus from a deer mouse. Now, is that something we're already addressing, or is that something nobody's thought of yet, or?
Well, I believe that issue is because of the exposure to the animal itself, then transmitting the virus. But
droppings in the dust in a tent.
I don't actually know the answer to that question, but
But it's not on your list of organisms that are being dealt with at this time.
No, I mean, again, we use coliform bacteria, number one, as the primary monitoring method, and that started clear back in 1910 to 1914 when people started chlorinating water. A coliform test was designed so that you check the water to make sure the chlorine worked, and then from there we're moving to fecal tests, and that's why one of the primary water quality measures that the city does is making sure that as part of the unfiltered criteria, they have to be within a certain count. They do an enumeration of fecal bacteria, and they have to meet a standard that's based on that, so that the raw water to begin with does not have an excessive amount of fecal bacteria in it. And as I said, in Walla Walla, they had to add treatment years ago prior to these new rules because they could not meet that raw water bacteria count in the summertime.
Well, thank you for a really enlightening presentation, both of you. It's been really, really great to have you here and the time to spend on that, I think, as well. So